What role should a father have in his child's life? What role should a father have in his child's life? Being their provider? Making sure there's food on the table by working hard? Is it teaching them their trade with the thought that they would follow in their footsteps when it comes to their occupation someday? Is it to support them with activities and hobbies that they're involved in? Okay, you could probably think of some other roles as well that a father can fulfill. But I would ask, are these the only roles a father should have in his child's life? And more strongly, I would ask, are these the most important roles that a father should have in his child's life? Or is there something else? Is there something more important role that a father has? This morning, we're going to look at the first of several passages where a father instructs his son. Okay, a father teaches his son. A father shares godly wisdom with his son. In this passage, he passes on God-honoring lessons, life lessons to his son. He shows practically how one is to walk with God in this life. He commands what his son should and shouldn't do. This father has a place of authority over his son. This authority is exercised in the instruction and the direction he gives to him. It's as if this son is in the classroom of his father. A father is displayed as a teacher of godly wisdom in the book of Proverbs. This past Sunday school quarter, Pastor Herb did an excellent study on the book of Proverbs in Sunday school. So if you were in that study, you were very well aware, and even if you weren't in that study, you might be very well aware of, in the book of Proverbs, there are many sayings, there are many verses that don't have an immediate connection to the verses around them. Okay, we get a statement and we move on to another subject in the next verse. But the passage we're going to consider from the book of Proverbs this morning is one that fits in line with many other passages that have a similar theme. And I want to just run through this to show us this aspect of a father passing on words, passing on instruction, passing on teaching to his son. If you'd flip with me just a chapter over to Proverbs 2, 1 through 2, I want to just run through several of these passages that we see are very similar in nature to ours this morning. Proverbs 2, 1 through 2 says, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding." Move to the next chapter, Proverbs 3, 1 and 2. It says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you." And then skip another chapter over to Proverbs 4, 1 through 4. And Pastor Herb actually went through this passage near the end of his Sunday school class, so it might be familiar to you. Verses 1 through 4, Proverbs 4 says, "Hear, O sons, a father's instruction, and be attentive that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments, and live." And I could read more for us. I could move to several other chapters, several other passages that have this same context of a father speaking to his son or to his sons. And what I read for us in each of these passages is just kind of the introductory words, kind of getting started, and then the father moves on to a specific subject, specific topic that he wants to address with his son. Okay, and we'll see what ours is today. But in these father-son passages, some of the subjects that he addresses is trusting in the Lord, lust and sexual purity, marriage, laziness, and more subjects are dealt by this father instructing his son. My point is to show that our passage this morning is one of these passages. The father deals with one particular subject in our passage with his son, but he deals with, as I said, more in the chapters to come. So this morning our text is, as Judah just read for us, Proverbs 1, 8 through 19, and we'll consider these words on this day that is Father's Day of a father with his son, and we'll consider this. the place of a father or a parent in general when it comes to who their children spend their time with. So that will be our theme of Proverbs 1, 8 through 19 this morning as we make our way through this text. Our theme is this: the place of a father or a parent in general when it comes to who their children spend their time with. And our passage, as many of these father-son passages do, begins with a general introduction concerning a parent's teaching role in their child's life. And this will cover the first 2 verses. And what I want us to consider first from these introductory words is a call for children and an example of a father. If you look with me at Proverbs 1, verse 8, that's where we'll get this call for children and an example of a father. Proverbs 1:8 says this: "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching." So we'll begin with this call to children. So children, listen up. Proverbs 1:8 says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching." Okay, first, the son, the child is called to hear his father's instruction, meaning he is both to attentively listen, okay, he's to have his ears wide open, taking in what his dad says, but also to obey it. To hear means to diligently take in what his dad says and then follow it. That is what he is being called to do in this verse. Then the son is called to forsake not his mother's teaching, which means he's not to abandon what he has been taught by his mother. Okay, he's not to reject what his mother has instructed of him previously. So as I said, kids, listen up, as this is a call to you to obey your parents, which I know, kids, you have heard many, many times, but this is what the Bible says. This is God seeing this as a good way, the right way for you to listen to your parents, to be attentively listening and obey it. Follow what they said. So children, I'd ask you right here, right now, are you doing this? Are you doing what this father commands his son? Do you listen to what your mom and dad says and then you do what they say? Or do you ignore it? Do you think that they don't know what they're talking about? So we've considered the children's side of this. Now there's a side of it for parents. An example of a father is what I want us to consider also from verse 8. And there's 2 aspects of this father's example that I want to draw out here. And the first to consider from this example of a father is the father gives directions to his son. It says this again in Proverbs 1:8. "Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and forsake not your mother's teaching." Okay, the father is giving his son instruction. Okay, we're going to see more specifically what that instruction is in this passage, but the instruction given in general in these father-son passages in Proverbs is instruction in wisdom. It's knowing the godly and the right way forward, or the godly and the right way to live and living in that way. The father is instructing, or he's teaching his son how he should live fearing God. The father's instructing his son in living a life of obedience to God. And further here, I would expand off this and say it's not just the father, but we see that the mother does as well, as it says at the end of verse 8, "Forsake not your mother's teaching." So here we have parents instructing their children in the ways of the Lord, is what the example is here. Okay, for us, as we think about our terms, teaching them the Bible, explaining what it means to them, instructing them in what it looks like to live these things out in their everyday lives is what is being talked about here in this father's instruction and mother's teaching. This is something that parents must be doing today, instructing their children in the ways of the Lord. The home should be a classroom in educating your children about God and following his word. So maybe that's a new thought, that the home should actually be a classroom. Okay, not speaking of how you're educating your children as you think about in that way, but just in general, every single Christian home should be a classroom, educating your children about God and following his word. So as you think about the role of a parent, okay, parents can teach or instruct their children in a lot of things, okay, how to do yard work, how to cook, how to clean, how to drive a car, how to throw a ball, how to work hard. And may one of those things, and especially above the rest, be teaching them how to live a life that is honoring and pleasing to the Lord. So parents, I would ask you to consider now, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Teaching and instructing your children about God and His Word in your home. Okay, certainly bring them to church. Okay, that's a must for them to learn here at church. But this is also something for them, or this is something that should be done as well in the home. So I said there's two aspects to this father's example I wanted to address. And the second of those, the other example that Solomon presents here is of honoring the mother. Okay, honoring the mother. A father honoring his wife. A father showing his children that he values their mother. If you look again with me at Proverbs 1:8. It says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction." So it's the dad talking, the father talking. "And forsake not your mother's teaching." Okay, this might seem like a surprising point to draw, but it's true and it's here. Okay, it's not only Solomon saying, listen to me, your dad. I'm the only one you should follow, but he points his son to the son's mom. Solomon promotes his wife, the son's mother. He shows the son how he should value her instruction. He shows the son that she is also in charge of him. The father honors his wife before the eyes of his children. What an example of a husband, of a dad, honoring his wife and their mother. A father showing his children that their mom is valuable and in authority over them. Okay, now, of course, as we think about this father in particular, as we think about Solomon, he had many wives, many children, so that's a completely different issue. But here in his words, I believe he presents a good example. He presents an example for fathers today to promote your wife, your kid's mother, with your words. Talk her up. Show them that you appreciate her. Show them that she is to be listened to. Okay, it fights against the temptation, fathers, to talk down on your wife to your kids. It fights against the temptation to belittle her. It fights against the temptation to speak or act in a way towards her that shows your children an example of not respecting her, of not honoring her, if they would follow your example. So fathers, in particular, I would ask you, are you honoring your wife in the presence of your children? Are you honoring your wife? Are you valuing her, promoting her in the presence of your children? Do you hold up the rules that she has established? Do you respect her opinions in her ways of parenting? When your kids come running to you asking if they could do something and you know their mom just told them no, do you say no as well? When your kids come running to you and ask you something, do you say, I need to talk with your mom first? This honors her before their eyes. That is the example of a dad that Solomon gives. So we find here in verse 8, both father and mother educate their son in this godly wisdom. And may this be the case in our homes as well. So as we continue on with this general introduction, the other thing that I want us to consider is the reward for the children and the value of this parental instruction. Okay, so in our next verse, we see the reward for the children and the value of this parental instruction. Look with me at verse 9. It's where we draw these points from. Proverbs 1:9 says, "For they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." Okay, let me start at verse 8 again and just flow into it. "Hear, my son, your father's instruction. Forsake not your mother's teaching, for they are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck." So again, I want to draw a point for the children and for the parents, and then have a point for both of you together. The point for the children from this text is that of the reward in listening and obeying your parents' teaching and guidance. Okay, the picture here is of items they're delightful to the eyes and items of worth. Okay, a graceful garland, as verse 9 says, "For they are a graceful garland for your head." This was an attractive wreath worn on the head. A pendant, as it says, "For a graceful garland for your head," and pendants for your neck. This was a necklace that was worn around the neck. Okay, the Father is saying that listening to one's parents figuratively brings these things, that your life and your conduct will be delightful for people to think about and watch you live and speak and act, that the instructions that one's parents gives are valuable. They are worth a lot, like this garland, like this pendant, like this necklace, when it comes to how one should live their life. And kids, I think this is a very different picture than how we might be tempted to think of our parents' instruction. Okay, you might find it restricting. You might find it burdensome. You might feel like it holds you back from truly living. All these rules, all this discipline, when really these things, when followed, are truly rewarding. They give you a life that is serving the Lord, resisting evil, an example to others, influencing others for the good. Your life would be a joy for others to watch and see you as you strive to follow after God in the way of wisdom if you follow the instruction of your parents. That's a different perspective, kids, than I think you're probably tempted to have, but it's a biblical perspective. The point for parents to consider from verse 9 is the worth of your teaching and instruction. Okay, it's to consider that instruction and that teaching from the father and mother of verse 8, and now we get to see its fruits. These things can lead to your children living a life that is pleasant to look at. Their investment, or your investment in your children's life, brings great treasure. Okay, parents, that guidance or that correction in living rightly, directing your child to be kind, teaching your child to pray, nightly reading to them a Bible story, bringing your child to church consistently and teaching them the importance of it, sharing the gospel with them, guarding their time so that they can serve the Lord, disciplining them when they disobey, talking to them about and calling them to follow what was preached on Sunday or what they were taught in Sunday school. These things may not seem like much, but Solomon shows what they can lead to. Your investment in these early years, teaching your children the ways of the Lord, can bring great spiritual wealth. As Solomon says here, for they, talk about that parental instruction, are a graceful garland for your head and pendants for your neck. And now the last point from verse 9, and this is bringing them together, a point for both children and parents to consider. Okay, as I said, the graceful garland and the pendant are used in a figurative way. It's not saying you're actually going to get a necklace or a wreath on your head, but it's speaking of spiritual rewards. It's speaking of godly and wise character that's gained. Okay, this is what Solomon puts out as an aim. This is what Solomon shows should be the thing that is valued. As I said, it's not a literal garland or pendant urn. It's not material wealth that Solomon commends to these parents to work towards for their children, but it's the things of God that Solomon commends. So children, do you value above all else that your parents can give you what they've given you spiritually? Children, do you value above all else anything your parents could give you what they've given you spiritually, that faith that they've passed on to you, the fact that they make church a priority above other activities, that they've taught you about God and His Word? Or do you complain, kids, about the things that your family can't afford, or the sports or the friend hangouts that your parents don't allow you to go to? Parents, is this what you're prioritizing for your family? The things of God or the things of this world, the Word or wealth? Do you struggle to find time to talk with your children about the things of God or take them to church to instruct them from the Bible because of the other things that you're involved in? It is godly instruction and its benefits that Solomon commends here, puts out as an aim for parents and puts out for children to value and gain from their parents. And this leads to the rest of our passage, that specific subject or the specific aspect that the father addresses with his son. And I say it leads to it as the father addresses who this son spends his time around and what they're pursuing, and that is material wealth, gain in the world's eyes. So that was the general introduction. Okay, we're not going to spend as much time on the rest of our verses of our passage, but we'll move on to the next passage or the next set of verses, and this is where we get that specific subject, and we find it's a warning, and more strongly, it's a command as to who the son should steer clear of. The father gives a warning, but it's more so a command. It is a command as to who this son should steer clear of. So this comes from verses 10 through 19 now, and I'd begin by asking, do parents have any business knowing or having a say in who their children spend their time around? Do parents have any business knowing or having a say in who their children spend their time around? Can parents say, no, you will not be friends with so-and-so? Can parents say, no, you cannot date that girl or that guy? Can parents say, no, you may not hang out with so-and-so? Solomon, the Bible for that matter, would say yes. Parents can and further should do so. So let's look at verses 10 through 19 and the example Solomon presents and further the words that he speaks to his son. And it begins with a command from the father concerning who this son associates with. Look with me at verse 10. Proverbs 1, verse 10. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. So as we think about just the beginning of these words, or this text we're about to look at, the father is anticipating here. He's looking to the future, what his child could encounter. And further, he anticipates people who are pursuing evil, sinners coming to his son and wanting them to join him, speaking persuading words to him as he speaks of them, enticing him. Okay, the father is real with his son. I'm going to mention that several times. He's real. He's forthright in showing the pull, the attractiveness that this son may feel towards these things. But then the father gives his command to his son, and I'd point out, it's not a choice that he gives his son or a recommendation, but it's a command. Do not consent. You should not be willing to go with them. Refuse to associate with them. The father gives very clear and pointed direction when it comes to who his son spends his time around. It shows a father's role in his son's or in his child's life when it comes to who his son will be friends with. So these points I'm about to mention probably would go with several of the other verses, but I'll mention them here as we move on through the verses, just as we think about these things. From the father so far, we see he's forward-thinking. He's forward-thinking not just about himself, not just about his business, but about his child's life. He's considering what his son could encounter. Okay, it's futuristic what he's talking about. He's not just stuck in the moment with his son, but he's thinking about the future of his son's life. And I would ask parents, I would ask fathers today, do you think beyond the here and the now of your child's life? Okay, are you forward thinking about what they might encounter as they begin their education, as they go to middle or high school, as they are no longer under your roof someday, as they begin to date? Do you consider what they may face? Do you anticipate the temptations or the problems they may experience? And then I'd also point out from verse 10 that we see a guarding, we see a protecting aspect from this father. He's looking out for his son. The father strives to keep his son from sin and evil. And then the last thing I want to mention about verse 10, and we'll move on, might seem like an obvious point, but it's something that we could easily miss, and that is that this father is talking with his son. He's talking with his son, and taking that a step further, he's intentionally talking with his son. He is with his son, sharing things with his son. He is around and spending time with his son. And I'd ask our fathers, do you make the time to talk with your children? Do you take the time to intentionally share lessons with them that will help them live an upright life? We move on from the command, and we see a further description of these people. And the first thing we see in the next couple of verses is the father is real about what these companions would be doing. Look with me at verses 11 and 12. It says, if they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit. Okay, this is probably not how these sinners would have spoken to the son, but this father shows his son the reality of what is being done when he joins in with these people. He doesn't hide what these people are trying to do. Okay, and as we think about the father being forthright, okay, he's putting out what these friends of his, these people he's associating with, are actually doing. He's forthright. As we think about this, there must be great discernment on what we share with our child. Okay, how real you may be with them at age 15 may be a lot different than when they're 6. But here the father says that these companions here would be attacking those who've done nothing wrong. What they're doing is completely unjust. And then the father shows, as we move on to the next verse, he shows the attractiveness of what could be gained materially from these friends. And I'll start again at verse 11, and it's verse 13 that we'll work our way down to. Verse 11 says, "If they say, 'Come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive and whole, like those who go down to the pit.'" And then verse 13 says, "We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder." So the father shows what is offered by these friends, by these people, that he could be enticed by, that they could become wealthy by joining in. The father shows that the son's flesh may pull him towards these things. Okay, and just a contrast to point out, here we get this material, this gain in the world's eyes, contrasted with what we've already seen we should value, and that is the parental instruction, what you can gain from your parents. The father also shows the attractiveness of what could be gained relationally. So it's not only material wealth that could be gained, but relationally there's a gain that could come. Proverbs 1:14 says, "Throw in your lot among us. We will all have one purse." Okay, so he shows that there might be a camaraderie that's gained through this as well. Okay, people might want you part of their friend group, part of your group so you feel like you fit in. And then as we continue on to follow the father's words, we see that he gives the command again concerning these companions. Look with me at Proverbs 1:15. "My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths." Okay, so the father's not only calling his son not to join in their business ventures, but he's saying don't spend time with them. Notice again, this is no choice or recommendation, but it is a command. Do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. The father is giving commands on who his child would spend his time with. The father is authoritatively directing his son not to follow in their footsteps. So the father is an example of the authority that he has over his children. The child is not in charge. And then as we continue on in the passage, again, a real description of who they are and what they do. As verse 16 says, "For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood." So he says, "My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths." And now he says, "For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood." So he's saying they run after evil. They do evil things. They sin. These people have no care about the Lord. And from this, we see that the father is not trying to be a killjoy. He's not just saying no to say no, but he shows that he is commanding his son not to associate with these people because of where it could lead this son. So children, I think this is good for you to remember as your parents tell you that you cannot spend time with so-and-so, that you can't date the person you want to date, and if it's because they're not a Christian, or because your parents do not believe this will be a godly influence on you, or rather a detrimental influence on you, children, this should be enough. You shouldn't fight it. You should humbly accept it, knowing that they aren't just trying to be a killjoy. They're not just trying to put a stop to your fun, but they are looking out for you as this father is his son. And then our passage and ultimately the words of the father to his son come to an end with the result. The result, if you look with me at verse 17 through 18. It says, "For in vain is a net spread in the sight of any bird, but these men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Such are the ways of everyone who is greedy for unjust gain. It takes away the life of its possessors." So he shows the trap that these people were actually leading themselves into and would lead this son into in verses 17 and 18. And then verse 19 closes by showing this way. If he associates with these people and goes down the path with them, it leads to death. Living in the ways of these sinners will lead to death. It leads them away from God and the life he can give. So again, we see this protecting aspect of the Father. So as we consider the words of this passage this morning, okay, I've applied them all throughout. I've been pretty personal with us, giving us direct applications and challenges for the children, for the fathers, for the mothers, for the parents. So rather than recapping these applications, I want to just sum it up in one overarching point, and that is children. You may have many voices speaking into your life. Okay, you have many people calling you to do this, do that, go this way, go that way. And here in this passage, the son has his father and his mother speaking to him, their voice in his life. And he has sinners, people that he could have considered his friends. They're speaking into his life. They have a voice in his life. One of these leads to life, one leads to death. One leads to a life that is delightful, one leads to a life that is not pleasant. One leads to a life that honors and pleases God, and one does not. Children, if you have parents that love the Lord, listen to them. Listen to them. Value them in their teaching. And specifically today, listen when they say you cannot spend time with a certain person. Respect the decision. Appreciate your parents' wisdom, foresight, and protection of you. For it may spare you from awful decisions, great mistakes, great sin, and a life of misery. So a question for the children and then the parents as we close. Children, which voice will you listen to? Which voice will you listen to? And then fathers, specifically, will you have a voice in your child's life, as we've seen with the father in our passage today? Fathers, will you have a voice in your child's life? Let's pray. God, we come before you on this Father's Day, thankful for our fathers, especially giving you thanks for the way that you have worked through the fathers that have instructed, have taught their children. Lord, I pray today as we have gotten these challenges and maybe have been convicted in some areas, Lord, if there's any fathers here today, any parents that have realized their lack of instruction, their lack of following such a passage and what the word lays out for parents, Lord, I pray that they today would make a commitment to living after your truths, living after your commands as it comes to a father with his child, with parents as they raise their children. Lord, I pray for all the parents here today that still have children in their home, no matter the age, no matter if they're just graduated, or no matter if they're just a toddler. Lord, I pray that you would empower them, that you would strengthen them, that you would give them the ability to have a voice in their child's life, that they would speak to their children, that they would instruct their children in your ways. Lord, there's many things that we can pass on to our children. But Lord, I pray for the parents today that they would pass on their faith. They would pass on their word to their children. And Lord, I pray for the children today. Lord, when they don't understand, when they're upset, when they totally disagree, Lord, give them the ability to submit to their parents, to listen to them, to realize even at a young age the value of their parents' instruction in the ways of the Lord. Lord, we thank you so much for our fathers and for the way in which you work through them. And in your name I pray, amen.